Neighborhood Association, and the first question will be directed to Mr. Phelan. Currently, development is taking over Quincy neighborhoods, yet the neighborhood streets that surround these developments are the same as they were in 1950. What are you going to do to make sure traffic keeps flowing freely? 2 minutes, please.
Well, you know, you can't kowtow to developers, and that's what seems to be going on. Anybody that wants a project seems to get it. I mean, developers are not your partners. This mayor, some 8 years ago in this very room in front of this very organization, stated that, to me very proudly, that Mayor, when I was elected, Streetworks came to me and said they had hit a wall and they were ready to walk. And I cautioned the mayor at that time. I said, Mayor, these folks are not your partners. Developers are not your partners. There are a lot of things, but they're not your partners. So we have to ask developers to pony up, to pay mitigation if they're going to develop. And if they're not going to take care of the infrastructure that's going to be impacted by that development, we shouldn't allow that development to move forward, number one. Number two, we have to guide development in areas that we want. That's why under my administration, we, for the first time in probably 30 years, rezone the Quincy Center area, because that's where we wanted direct development to go. We streamlined permitting processes. We allowed for mixed-use development. We developed design guidelines to go along with those, with that zoning, to make sure that the development that went there was quality development. We even presented the very first of its kind district improvement finance zone in the city that created a financial mechanism to be able to perform infrastructure improvements to encourage development in that area and away from our neighborhoods. That's proper planning. I don't see that same type of planning going on now. And what I see is absolute gridlock. It's funny, 8 years ago when this mayor ran against me, he criticized me for gridlock in the city. And I have to say, it's a heck of a lot worse now than it was 8 years ago, or at least it is when I try to get out of the city in the afternoon or in the morning.
Mr. Koch, you have a 30-second rebuttal.
Well, if anyone's driven downtown, you can see that downtown is underway. It's coming out of the ground. For the first time in nearly 50 years, any project south of Granite Street is now happening. Streetworks was designated by the former mayor. We partnered with them and we fired them. Today we have 4 developers at the table. We've leveraged millions of dollars of federal and state dollars for investment in the infrastructure in the downtown. That wouldn't happen without a developer, without a plan. So we're moving forward economically in a great way. The Quincy Mutual Project's underway. Galvin Project's about to get underway. And in November, there'll be a project submitted to the City Council with public hearings for public review. I'm proud of the record of development. We were the first mayor in 25 years to submit a complete rezoning of our entire city to the City Council, which tightened up in those residential A areas the ability to abuse the loopholes in development in our city. So we've made great progress in strengthening and protecting neighborhoods, and we are promoting development where it ought to be in the center of our city. More is to come, but we've made great strides, and I'm proud of that record to date.
Thank you, Mr. Koch. Mr. Koch, under the current agreements, the emergency department at the former Quincy Medical Center will expire at the end of 2015. What are your plans for the facility if the city takes ownership of the property at the end of this year? 2 minutes, please.
Well, first of all, to refresh everybody, the city got out of the hospital business in 1999. It was spun off to a nonprofit, a board of directors with business people and medical folks. It continued to lose money. And then Stewart took it out of bankruptcy 4 years ago with the agreement that was supposed to be committed to 5 years, keeping the hospital open. The only person that could make that decision on protecting the city was the Attorney General. She let them off the hook from that 5-year commitment. However, at the time of the bankruptcy proceedings, we insisted that the right of reverter be in the deed for that center. Right of reverter means the day it ceases being used medically, the property reverts back to the city of Quincy. After all, the city invested in that property for many, many decades. The reality is the hospital continued to lose money, couldn't sustain itself. And that's part of part of the country we live in. We're right next to Boston. A lot of people choose to go to Boston for those elective surgeries, and the reality is Quincy Medical is one of those community hospitals that get hurt by the national health care with the reimbursement rates. So we kept the emergency room open, emergency department. We continue to be in discussions with Stuart about using that facility for medical-related purposes for the people of our city, in conjunction with keeping the emergency department open at that location. Should they not perform in that regard, I will invoke the right of reverter, take the property back, and look for other medical entities to get involved with the city in protecting that property for medical uses going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Koch. Mr. Phelan, you have a 30-second rebuttal.
Just to jump back to the prior question, the suggestion that I brought Streetworks in and that Mayor Koch fired them is completely contrary to what this mayor said 6 years ago when I was running against the mayor. Notwithstanding the hospital, let me list them: Della Chiesa, McIntyre, Hannon, Larea, Tobin, Sheets, Phelan, all fought and took steps to keep that hospital going. Now, whether it was a fait accompli or not, I heard not one word prior to that hospital closing from this administration. Not one word of warning, not one opportunity to get the people behind saving a hospital. Many people in this city rely on that hospital, and there should have been a fight to keep it open, and there was absolutely no fight. That's not leadership, ladies and gentlemen. That's being asleep at the switch. The mayor talks about a right of reverter. Well, let's see if that right of reverter rules the day, number one. Number two, the fight should have been taken prior to Stewart getting that property in bankruptcy. They overpaid. They paid almost twice what any of the other bidders paid, but the mayor won't tell you that. The fact of the matter is, nothing was said by this mayor, by his administration. The public was not warned, and without any notice whatsoever, they closed their doors one day, and the mayor threw up his hands and said, what are we going to do now? That's not leadership, folks. That's not, building bridges with your community and getting people behind something that's worthwhile, like Mayor Sheets did, quite frankly.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. We're going to move on. This is a key issue, according to the Adams Historical Neighborhood Association. Mr. Phelan, directed to you. Several recent media reports highlight the city's plan to purchase about 8 acres of the Eventide Nursing Home's land, located at 215 and 205 Adams Street, to protect it from being developed and preserve it as open space. Can you tell us which portion of the Eventide property the city plans to purchase?
Well, I'm not in the mayor's seat right now, but I find it kind of ironic. Let's take a step back. It's not the Eventide property. From what I understand, there's a local developer who has that property under agreement. So are we going to have another sweetheart deal for another local developer? And if he has it under agreement, how much did he purchase it for? And how much are we proposing to pay for it? There seems to be a lot of questions unanswered, just like there were a lot of questions unanswered when this administration, without council approval, outrageous, without council approval, purchased a worthless piece of property that was assessed for about $100,000 off his childhood friend for 3 times the assessed value, days before that property was going to be foreclosed upon, and when the property was in tax title, and the city could have just taken it for back taxes. That same individual is now under federal indictment. Now we're looking over the other end of the city at Louis, down in Howe's Neck, and the mayor is proposing to pay $300,000 for a parking lot from another contributor, an individual who had a fundraiser for him, that is owned by the owner of Louis, right? Now this individual purchased Louis for about $350,000, and the mayor is proposing to pay $300,000 because the fella can't seem to make things work and he can't pay his taxes. And now all of a sudden there's a grand plan to have that little parking lot part of a bigger public use for the water use for that neighborhood. But that's not true. I can tell you one thing: the guy that owned the property before the gentleman that owns it now would have loved $300,000 for
Thank you,
the
Mr.
parking
Phelan.
lot.
Thank you very much. Mr. Koch, 2 minutes for you with the same question.
Well, first of all, the Eventide is broken up into 3 parcels. There's the part where the building is, there's the parcel in front of the building, and then there's the part, if you're looking at the building to the right, which is the old Gardner estate. As I understand it from Eventide, they have entertained an agreement with a local developer to purchase the building site, and I understand the building will be maintained as it looks today. I announced several months ago that I'd be asking the Community Preservation Committee as well as the City Council to support the city purchasing the parcel in the front and the parcel to the right, the old Gardner estate, for open space purposes, which I think has great merit being near the Adams Mansion and protecting that resource. Number 2, the land in question, the former mayor indicated on Furnace Avenue was a piece of land needed to build a pump station. And this summer, Congressman Lynch announced a $5 million grant to build a pump station on that location, which is the lowest point in that part of West Quincy, that will handle it. He didn't tell you when he bought cobblestone from Mr. Flynn on C Street back in 2000 some odd when you were mayor. His own internal document said that it was valued at $700,000, and he purchased it for $1.2 million. So I'm not really sure what your thought process was on that. The Louis that was mentioned, the parking lot's diagonally across from the Maritime Center. We heard from a number of people in the HouseNet community, the city should look at that for use for the Maritime Center rather than having 3 or 4 condominiums being built on it. I listened to the people of HouseNet. We submitted that order to the City Council, and the City Council will make that decision. And I look forward to that decision. So we're moving to protect the neighborhood here, the Adams National Historic Park, which we should, because once something is built, there's no recreating open space. And, stay tuned on that one, because that will be happening in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Koch. Mr. Koch, this is also a key issue according to the association. Reports also mention the potential future developments of the Eventide property once the nursing home relocates. Will you make sure any future construction on the remaining land is restricted to the current residential A zoning and does not exceed the same footprint and height as the current Eventide nursing home building?
Simple answer, yes. If we did not move to purchase the other 2 parcels, several single-family homes could be built on that parcel, or other proposals could come before the city to use those parcels. The existing structure, as I understand it, the developer wants to keep it to look exactly like it does. There's no plan to add anything to it, but there is nothing formal in front of the city at this point. That's an agreement the developer has with Eventide. It is a private entity, and it's not public land at this point. So I will fight to make sure that that footprint does not change on that building. That look of that building does not change. And by taking the parcels around the land, we're protecting Adams Street, your neighborhood, as well as the mansion for generations to come.
Thank you, Mr. Koch. Mr. Phelan, 2 minutes for you.
Certainly, the mayor mentioned in the last answer that, it'll be going in front of the city council. The difference between the purchase that we made when I was the mayor is I did present it to the city council. When the mayor's childhood friend, who's under a federal indictment right now, when the city bought that property, they didn't have the city council vote on it. And I'd like to know why. Notwithstanding that, the mayor didn't answer the question about single-family residents. That footprint certainly will stay the same, and if I were the mayor, I would vote and fight to withhold any variance that would allow for anything but a single-family residence. That was not answered by the mayor. The mayor talks about rezoning for the first time the entire city. Then why are we granting so many variances to developers to clog our streets? If we have the proper zoning and there's not a hardship, why are we granting all the variances? Why did we rezone if we're not going to live within the zoning? And that's not happening, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why you can't get out of the city in the afternoon at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and get on 128 off of Bergen Parkway, or go over the bridge in the morning when you're going over the Neponset River Bridge. Let's live by the zoning if it's good zoning. And if it isn't, okay, let's change it. But let's have some public input. and no more behind the scenes, sweetheart deals for developers. And that's what we're seeing right now in the Quincy Center as well.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. Phelan, this is a multi-part question, so I'll do my best to get through this. Construction of the Adams-Hancock Common, which will link the Hancock Cemetery and the United First Parish Church, is projected to cost in excess of $20 million. The city plans to use the state's Infrastructure Investment Incentive, I-Cubed program, to finance the construction and will be eligible to receive funds from the I-Cubed program, quote, once new development in Quincy Center meets certain thresholds for new state tax revenue, end quote. So here are three questions. A, please translate certain thresholds into dollars. B, how long does the city have to meet these thresholds? And C, how do you plan to pay for this project if the city doesn't meet the thresholds in the required time?
I don't know, and I don't know. I mean, I'm a math guy, believe me, I have a math brain, but I don't know if I can tell you exactly what the thresholds are. I can tell you this, it's far north of $20 million. It's $38 million according to the mayor's own spokesperson. When I was in office, we devised the plan for the Adams Green, but we didn't anticipate moving forward with it until we saw enough private investment to pay for it, and that's what the I-Cubed money is all about. We have not been approved for that money. In fact, we have not shown that the development is going to be sufficient enough to pay down the notes that are going to have to be taken out in order to pay for that park. $38 million, that's ballooned from about $15 million, I believe. We were able to obtain 2 grants totaling approximately $10 million for that location when I was in office. This mayor personally increased the size of the fountain that's going to be placed there, such that the foundation is going to require infrastructure and utilities to be moved, costing the city millions of dollars. He's begun, once again, a project without having any idea where the money is coming from. And if he says he does, he doesn't. And I can answer the last question, because the I-Cubed borrowing, that if it ever gets approved and you can identify the state tax revenues that will be generated from the development that goes on in that zone, if that money doesn't come through, the full faith and credit of the city's tax base has to pay for that. That means your taxes have to pay for a $38 million elaborate park that we shouldn't be building, at least not now, until we see private investment move forward in the downtown.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. Koch, 2 minutes for you.
Well, the I-Cubed program is a terrific program the Commonwealth offers, which allows us to leverage a project against future tax revenues from the Commonwealth. Much like the district Mayor Phelan alluded to, district improvement finance for the downtown, it's basically the same thing, except it's in a state form. The downtown is moving. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but the building's going up. There's another building that will start next month on the corner of Cliveden Street. And in November, another developer will be before the city council for the next phase. So the building is happening. Those revenues are being generated, and there's a lot of new growth revenues in the downtown taxes because values are going up. As far as the project goes, it's about a $20 million project. We this summer received a commitment from Governor Baker for $4.2 million to deal with the infrastructure under Hancock Street. There's infrastructure needed for the park, but there's also replacement infrastructure needed for our antiquated sewer, water, and drain lines that go through that area. In addition, National Grid, Verizon has to replace their ductwork under there because it's also ancient. All that work has to happen before we can get the finished product of the park. And you know what? This city deserves a first-class park. The Adamses and their wives being buried in that church deserve a first-class park. And it was talked about at those public charrettes, building a first-class green in the center of our city. That's exactly what we're doing. That's what the vision is, and that's what we'll continue to do. If the I-Cube doesn't play out, MassWorks grant, and there are other state and federal grant opportunities we will use to do it. We've been successful to date, and we'll continue to be successful because we've built partnerships. We work with people. Every agency at the state level, the heads of those agencies pick up the phone. The governor returns my call. I work with the congressmen. I work with us U.S. senators on all of these projects. That's how you get things done, by working with others. We have a great plan in place. We've had great success to date, and we'll continue to see it through.
Thank you, Mr. Koch. Mr. Koch, taxes, taxes, taxes. Each campaign claims to have kept spending in check and only had minimal tax increases while in office. How do you propose to reduce the tax burden on homeowners?
Taxes is always a difficult issue for everybody. Nobody likes to pay taxes, and we want to have a quality city with the best services we possibly can have. Outside of public safety, the most important thing we do in government, I think, is educating our children, which requires investment in our schools. And whether you have kids or not in the schools, a school system's success has a direct relationship to your property value, so it's important to strike that balance. We're trying to deal with a lot of old infrastructure in our city that has to be dealt with. We're investing back into that infrastructure, into your neighborhoods. You know, it's been said that I'm spending recklessly. Our bond rating was increased last year. There's only 3 communities in Massachusetts with a higher bond rating than Quincy. If I was spending recklessly, that wouldn't happen. I've been accused that we're piling all this debt on. We have one of the lowest debt ratios in the state of any city. We're doing it in a balanced way, we're doing it responsibly by doing it incrementally. The Boston Globe did a study last year on all kinds of communities around Boston, including Quincy and the South Shore, and it showed Quincy's taxes were right in the middle. We weren't the lowest, we weren't the highest. There's still excess levy capacity, we don't tax to the max. And that's why we need to get Quincy Center going, and that's why we need to have the economic development in these other parts. We're working with Boston Scientific right now on the second half of that building for commercial development with new jobs to pay commercial taxes. That's why we work hard to fill 2 vacant buildings at State Street that were vacant for a number of years. They're nearly full now. Those will be paying full commercial taxes. That's how we get the relief on the residential side that you deserve. We'll continue to do that with the programs. We've been successful to date. The commercial real estate values are now going up in the city. They were stagnant for a number of years. The residential values are also going up dramatically in Quincy, and that's all a good sign.
Thank you, Mr. Koch. Mr. Phelan, how do you propose to reduce the tax burden on homeowners?
Well, you don't start projects that you can't finish. In the prior question, the mayor never said how he was going to pay for that project that he started, $38 million. We don't have a way to pay for it yet. When I was mayor, we had the lowest tax increases of any city in the state with 2 exceptions. This mayor, in 1 year, raised taxes nearly twice as much as I had in my 6 years combined. Let me say that one more time. Nearly twice as much in 1 year as I had in my 6 years combined. On average, nearly 3 times as much as I did on a yearly basis. How do you cut them? That's what you want to know. Well, let me tell you how I did it. When I took office, it was you want to talk about a fiscal mess. The city was rolling over bills from one fiscal year to the next without telling you folks. We turned a $4.5 million deficit into a $17 million surplus when I left. We did things like collected pension obligations from the college, reduced the workforce by over 100 employees without one layoff through attrition. We collected 10 years of back parking tickets, believe it or not. It takes management, ladies and gentlemen. 2 out of my 6 years, we decreased taxes while I was in office. I had a healthy respect for whose money it was that I was entrusted with. I always remembered that. I talked to so many people out there. One woman, it was heartbreaking. She lived in a state of anxiety because she didn't know how she was going to pay her tax bill. And the thought of wasteful spending that goes on now, yes, excessive, wasteful spending that's going on under this administration, it's not right, quite frankly. To think, when that deal that was signed with Streetworks was signed with Penn's, that this mayor took taxpayers' money and purchased $2,800 worth of commemorative pens, nice engravings and everything else.
Thank you, Mr.
And this
Phelan.
woman's worried about how she's going to pay her tax bill? That's not right. That's not leadership.
Mr. Phelan, as mayor, will you honor the veterans preference rule for all civil service hiring?
Yes, I will. You know, and the civil service laws are very strict. You go by a list. There are legal ways in which you can alter from those. I did it twice when I was mayor. Once, because I felt we needed more women on the police department. So I called for a gender-specific civil service list. The other time, I called for a language-specific civil service list because I felt we needed a police department that properly reflected our community and could better deal with the issues that our community faced. So we hired some Chinese, Mandarin, and Cantonese-speaking police officers. But beyond that, we went by the civil service list each and every time. You are allowed to do lateral transfers in cities. In other words, you can hire a Milton police officer or a Holbrook fireman if you wish. I never did that because it's always political when you do it. You wouldn't believe the folks that call you up every week saying, "Can you get my brother over? He's in the Hingham Police Department. He wants to be a Quincy police officer." But every time you do that, you're bypassing more than likely a veteran that's on the list. So yes, I would absolutely adhere to that, and I wouldn't hire lateral transfers, which I believe unfairly eliminate certain veterans from being able to become police officers and firefighters more importantly.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. Koch, will you honor the veterans preference rule for all civil service hiring?
Yes. And I'll use the remainder of my time to talk a little bit about some of the financial issues. When I took office, things were a mess. We had to bring the Department of Revenue in. And what happened, the increase in the property taxes that Mayor Phelan was speaking of, think about that. I was in my first year. I didn't have a program. I didn't have a job. We had to go up on the taxes. Why? Because my predecessor cooked the books, created a sewer water enterprise fund, and started charging city departments to that fund. It was the state that uncovered it and ordered me, as the CEO of the city, to put it back on the general revenue, the tax side. This mayor engaged the Honeywell program. 3 months in, the city auditor come up and said, "You need to find $1.7 million to fund the Honeywell contract." They said, "I thought it wasn't going to cost anything." And now the Honeywell could go on for hours about. It was a terrible contract that the mayor signed at that time that cost us an awful lot of money. Attorney General investigated it, settled with Honeywell. We got out of the $22 million maintenance contract and a $4 million cash settlement for the city. It was such a bad contract. The mayor settled with city unions on contracts and didn't identify the money to pay for those things. All of that came to a head in my first year in office. And yes, we dealt with it. We dealt with it. But I would suggest that that tax increase was Bill Phelan's. The mayor mentioned earlier about the hospital. In 2005, the hospital closed a major unit in that building. Mayor Phelan said in the Patriot Ledger, "That's a private hospital, there's nothing we can do about that." Now he feels differently. So folks, I just ask you to pay attention to the facts in these next 2 weeks. Facts don't lie, they're stubborn things.
Mr. Koch, media reports cost overruns of millions of dollars on what seems to be every major city project. What can be done to ensure future city projects are completed on schedule, on budget, and not at taxpayers' expense?
I'm not sure specifically what project you're talking about. When I took office, we took the Quincy High project and we built it on time and on budget. The Central Middle School, we built it on time and on budget. We get 80% reimbursement from the state. We're about to break ground on New Sterling Middle School, getting some 75 to 80% reimbursement from the state. We just rebuilt the intersection at North Quincy High School, Hancock and East Wanham Streets, getting 75% reimbursement from the state. Didn't cost us any more. Quincy Avenue, East and West Howard Streets, new intersection, 100% cost of it by the federal and state government. The only project that became very challenging was the old town hall project, which when we went into it, didn't understand how difficult the building, how badly the building was in shape, until we started to peel it back by layer. The engineers and architects saw that. So I think our 1844 town hall which is the most iconic building for the city. It tells our heritage, is important to reinvest in and bring it back to its grandeur. That's something we're giving to the next generation. Half of the cost approximately is being funded by the community preservation monies, which is exactly the use of community preservation monies. We're saving a gem of a building historically, not only historically to our heritage, but architecturally the Greek revival gem that it is. It's noted throughout the state. City Hall, First Parish Church, Richardson Library. It's a great corridor of magnificent architectural assets, and I think it's our job to maintain those. The building was let go for so long by so many administrations. It was embarrassing bringing people in there, and we're violating every code we enforce. That building is being preserved. Yes, it costs more money than first we thought budgeted, yes, but not very much more than what the actual bid came in at when we actually did the project. So I don't know any other projects that are in that question, Joe, but I think we've done very, very well.
Thank you, Mr. Koch. Mr. Phelan, same question for you.
Well, the $38 million park is one of them. We still don't know where the money's gonna come from. That maintaining of the city, beautiful historic city hall project, I mean, building, you can forget about that because it was gutted from the dirt floor to the rafters to the granite walls. There's nothing historic within that building currently because it was completely gutted. The fact is the architect who did the study to determine what work actually needed to be done said, oh, we have to completely gut it and restore it for millions and millions of dollars, and then guess who got the contract to be the architect to do the design work to redo City Hall? Well, you guessed it, and it's the same architect that evidently wasn't doing his job because it went from a $7 million project, by the way, which I don't believe it ever was a $7 million project. It was underfunded to begin with, and it ballooned to $15 million. That's a pretty significant overrun. When you talk about the Quincy High School, for this mayor to take credit for that high school is absurd. And to blame me for losing 90%, when I sat in the audience after dedicating my life to get that project built instead of on a toxic waste dump initially, and then on Faxon Field where that beautiful track is now in Canby because we don't have a 6-story high school on it like the state was trying to force us to build on. We actually put a shovel in the ground, and we were a year and a half into that project when this mayor simply took office and waited for it to be built. He'll tell you that he saved $1 million somehow working conjunctively with the state treasurer's office and not having to connect the two buildings together. Well, the fact is it was the state treasurer's office that required the separation of those buildings to begin with, and then removed that impediment that saved money. It had nothing to do with this mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan.
I could go on and on and on.
Mr. Phelan, a proposal to purchase a parcel using Community Preservation Act funds to assist a business owner who's behind in their tax payments has been reported. As mayor, would you veto any such purchase?
Yeah, I don't know that the proper term is veto, but I certainly wouldn't be in favor of taking that off that gentleman's hands. And the mayor suggests that it can be developed. Well, it's a parking lot connected to a restaurant. The restaurant would be non-conforming if you took the parking lot away, and it would require the restaurant to close as well. So because this fella's behind in his taxes, we're gonna bail him out, just like we bailed out the mayor's childhood friend with a purchase of 3 times the assessed value without council approval, based on an appraisal by an appraiser that actually worked for the mayor's childhood friend in the past that he was buying the property off of. Crazy, right? But it's true, folks. So yeah, when I was in office, we worked with the Community Preservation Act Fund. We purchased more open space than the city has in generations. We purchased the Hazeltine property off of Faxon Field, the Cobblestone property that the mayor refers to, a property out at Marina Bay, $6.5 million of open space, beautiful open space. That particular property is not the type of property that I think is envisioned for purposes of the Community Preservation Act, and I honestly think it's another sweetheart deal, and I would not be supportive of it.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. Koch?
A couple of things. One is it's not community preservation monies that was proposed. We put forth before their appropriation from free cash. It was not from community preservation money, number one. Number two is the restaurant was there long before there was a parking lot. The parking lot was added, so I'm not so sure the ruling would be non-conforming. The reality is the HouseNet community had a meeting. They reached out to my office by email, by call, and made the suggestion that the city look at it. Now, we're looking at a master plan for the Maritime Center, which is awesome because we have 27 miles of shoreline and we don't have many places for access to boating. And the land is right across the street. How many times have we said historically, geez, too bad somebody didn't move to take that land, because once it's built on, it's cost prohibitive to take. So that's still before the city council. They have to make that decision. That's what it's about. The Furnace Ave piece, I had authorization through the bond issue to purchase it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to purchase it. We did purchase it on Furnace Avenue. We generally don't use assessed values comparisons. That is inaccurate, and I think Mr. Phelan knows that. Appraisals are done. The reality is there were other parcels in that same area that paid more per square foot than what we did. And if we didn't have the parcel, we wouldn't be getting a $5 million grant from FEMA to build a pumping station, to provide the relief for Miller Street, Cross Street, and all those areas that get plagued by flooding every so many years. It's not fair, it's not right. So we responded to that need. We're investing back in the neighborhood, just like we are in Albrecht Road, just like we are cleaning the entire Furnace Brook and rebuilding the Furnace Brook. We've applied for additional FEMA money for another pump station on Albrecht Road to deal with that issue. We're working with the state and town of Milton to resolve the Blue Street issues using the state drainage system off of the expressway. So we continue to make progress, and we've got to continue to make investments back into our community. Our infrastructure is old and we have to deal with it, and we've been dealing with it.
Mr. Koch, with all the proposed construction for the Adams-Hancock Common, where will Quincy residents, especially seniors, park when they want to do business at City Hall?
Well, actually, we've already made some accommodations. If you drive in towards the MBTA station, there is an island that is parked on both sides that has been reserved for many, many years for city employees. We took a portion of that, I think about 15 spaces, and that is now for City Hall business only. So it actually may be just as easy for people to park there, cut across the mall, and go right into the building to do their business. So I think that's an improvement. All of the related businesses the city do and people doing business with the city are in the glass building now. The reconstruction of the old building will be all public space for council meetings, planning board, zoning board, Concom, license board, historic exhibit space. So that connection to that parking lot right next to the mall, I think, will work perfectly in resolving that issue. In addition, once the green is built, there will still be parking on Hancock Street on the park side. So if one was up for a walk, they could cut across the park and come into the building. But for those people that need a shorter route, we have made accommodations on that lot. We'll watch it closely, and if we have to expand it, we will.
Thank you, Mr. Koch. Mr. Phelan?
Yeah, I'm not sure where, I mean, if I'm a senior citizen and I'm walking all the way from behind there, all the way to City Hall, that's a pretty tough haul, but I want to go back to the pumping station. You know, the mayor said that the city council approved a bond initiative. Yeah, the bond initiative was approved before there was ever even any plan for flood mitigation. So in other words, there was no property identified, nothing, and there was, when the bond issue was voted on by the city council, and it didn't say anything about the Furnace Ave property. And the appraisal, when you purchase property not by eminent domain, it should be purchased for no more than 125% over the last 3 years assessed value. That didn't happen either. When you purchase property by eminent domain, you should have 3 appraisals, not one appraisal by a fella who works for the guy whose property, who had worked in the past for the guy whose property you're taking. I mean, that's a little bit ridiculous. To just address some of the mayor's suggestions about Honeywell, the Attorney General's office found that water improvements were not consistent with the statute. In other words, water savings was not the equivalent to energy savings, and the fact that the water savings in our contract were not guaranteed. Therefore, she felt that the state law had not been followed. You would have thought I'd be taken out in handcuffs if you believe what the mayor was saying in the last election, right? All this about shoddy workmanship. The arbitrator found in favor of Honeywell 99% of the time in terms of the workmanship in that project. With regards to cooking the books, let me repeat, this mayor increased taxes twice as much in 1 year as I had in my entire 6 years combined.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. We've reached the end of our round of questioning this evening. Time for closing statements, and as predetermined by a coin toss, Mr. Phelan, you'll have 2 minutes.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. We've had a great opportunity to discuss some of the issues, and I really do appreciate it. And I also want to acknowledge my wife and daughter who are here and tell them I love them. It is tough, as the mayor says, on families. You know, campaigns in general, and you know, this campaign seemed to take on a little bit different tone after the preliminary. I had the great fortune of having been endorsed by Ann Mahoney and Doug Guttrow, who served with both of us in government, and I appreciate that. I appreciate their support. I appreciate the fact that they have trust in my ability to lead this city. People ask me, why are you doing it again, Bill? You know, haven't you had enough? And I try to explain what drives me and how I was brought up. When you're the mayor, you have the ability to help people. Every single day you're in office, in little ways and in large ways. You also have the ability to guide the city's future in ways that might allow you to have the type of city that maybe your kids want to raise their families in. That's why I see what's been happening in our city. I see the lack of transparency. I see the excessive spending. I see favoritism that I think has no place in our city government. And I believe I can do better. And with your help, we can reunite for change in Quincy, and we can have the type of Quincy that we know we can have. It's a great city, great neighborhoods, great people. Please give me your vote on November 3rd, and we'll have a bright future. Thank you so much.